Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS News. I am in the JNS Media Hub in downtown Jerusalem. My colleague Alex Traiman is in Washington, D.C., proudly representing JNS. Alex, how are things going over there in the U.S.?
Going well. We're speaking today at the Middle East Forum Conference in Jerusalem, and hopefully I will be home before the end of the week. It's been a long journey on the road, but a good one for JNS, and definitely look forward to doing this next episode back at home in the studio together with you.
Looking forward to have you back here. A lot, of course, going on here in the Middle East. Top story here is Israel officially launched Operation Gideon's Chariots, a large ground offensive in Gaza. So far, the IDF has eliminated dozens of terrorists, according to the IDF spokesperson, destroying terrorist infrastructure both above and below ground, and are now taking control of strategic areas with the plans of staying in Gaza, according to Prime Minister Netanyahu. What are you hearing over there, Alex?
Well, I think you just said something really important, which is that this operation is meant to take full control of the Gaza Strip, something that wasn't able to be accomplished in the first round, in part because the Biden administration did not want Israel to take full control of the Gaza Strip. They were agreed to let us go after Hamas's infrastructure, but they always wanted the Palestinian Authority to take over the Gaza Strip, not Israel. And the new chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, has put together a plan that will allow for Israel to take over the Gaza Strip. And what that means is that when you take over a specific part of the Gaza Strip, you don't leave it, because we saw in the first rounds that when you leave the area, then Hamas just regroups and retakes the area. So this is going to be a complete takeover of Gaza, something unlike we'd seen before. Now, a big question is the timing, right? People will want to know, why is this happening right now? Why did this happen earlier? Trump's already been in office for several months. And I think that people don't understand the dire situation that Israel was in with regard to weapons. It was fighting a battle and several battles in multiple fronts as its stockpiles of munitions and were dwindling. And it took time for the Trump administration to not to approve it. They approved it very quick, but from the time that they did approve it, for weapons to get to Israel, things like even D9s and these bulldozers and tractors that Israel believes it needed for this operation, it took a lot of time for these things to get to Israel. It took 2 months from the time that they were approved to get to Israel, and then it took another amount of time to be armored and ready for battle. So you know, this plan was put into place, and now you see also in the news questions about Trump wanting this war to end, and they do say that they want the war to end. They're not saying, by the way, how they want it to end. They're not saying Israel has to stop so that this ends. They want it to end quickly with an Israeli victory. That's how they want it to end. And you should be sure that every move that's being made right now, including the battle plans, including the timing, has been highly coordinated with the United States. There's not any pressure right now on Israel to stop this offensive. Quite the opposite. There is a complete green light from the Trump administration for Israel to go in and do what they're doing right now.
Yeah, as you said, the White House press secretary a couple of days ago said that President Trump has made it very clear he wants to see this conflict in the region end. But as you said, he didn't say he wants Israel to lose the war. Leaving the window open there, and as you said, providing the arms necessary for Israel to finish the job. At the same time, there are conflicting reports whether Israel took out the de facto head of Hamas, Mohammed Sinwar, the brother of Yahya Sinwar, also taking out another one of the Sinwar brothers, Zakaria Sinwar, killed in an airstrike Saturday night. Hamas says Mohammed Sinwar is still alive. Israel, over the last 48 hours, has said, in fact, he was killed in a targeted strike. So at this point, not exactly sure if he is alive or isn't, but definitely he was targeted by Israel in a pinpointed strike.
Sure, and Israel did use this time to collect a lot of intelligence, and that's why as soon as the war began, you've seen that Israel's taking out some of the top remaining leadership of Hamas. And at this point, Hamas has to understand nobody is safe. Israel's going now for the jugular. They're going to take out the entirety of Hamas leadership. And Hamas leadership have two ways out of Gaza right now: in a coffin or in some kind of a deal where they release the hostages and they get exiled. That's the deal that's on the table. It's the deal, by the way, that I spoke with Minister of Strategic Affairs and War Cabinet member Ron Dermer about already in February of 2024. They were talking about a deal to end the war, which would see the return of all hostages, which would see the exile of Hamas leadership and an end to hostilities. And that's the deal that Israel's putting on the table right now. So if Hamas wants to take that deal, some of their leaders might live to see another day, and the hostilities can stop and all the hostages will be returned home. If Hamas doesn't want to release the remaining hostages, then they're going to meet their end the difficult way. And I think also that's another point with regard to the timing of this operation. Israel did float a lot of time to Hamas to release the hostages, willing to engage in extended ceasefires, both as the release of hostages was taking place and during the negotiation periods for additional hostages. It's clear at this point that Hamas has no intention of releasing the last hostages. And Israel doesn't have anything that they can give because Israel's not prepared to allow Hamas to retain power in the Strip. That's what the prime minister has been saying. There's two war aims. Number one is to bring back the hostages. Number two is to remove Hamas from power. So Hamas is the one holding the hostages. So they're not going to give back those hostages as long as they feel like they can keep the battle going.
That being said, Israel does have a negotiating team right now in Doha and Qatar actively working to exhaust every opportunity to reach some kind of deal. According to the latest reports, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, his deal reportedly envisions a multi-stage agreement beginning with a temporary ceasefire and the release of Israeli hostages, followed by other steps such as the release of further Arab terrorists from prisons and future negotiations aimed at a permanent cessation of hostilities. So there is a team on the ground in Qatar, even though it appears, because of Hamas, because of the fact that they're unwilling to release the hostages, there is still activity there on the hostage negotiation front.
Well, the prime minister has always said that the only way that you're going to get Hamas to release hostages at this point is under pressure, right? Through military force. So now Israel tried the route of withholding force and allowing negotiations. As Israel waits, what you see is Hamas just only hardens their position. It's only when Israel is putting their pedal to the metal, putting the knife to the jugular, that Hamas is understanding that they have, that their best option might be to release the hostages. At the same time, these are suicide bombers, and they'll go to the end on this. They've already seen much of their senior leadership killed. They've seen most of their lower ranks killed, and yet they continue to fight. For them, this is ideological, and they want to go meet their virgins in heaven. So they'll go to the death. Many of them, they've been trained to do that. They've been indoctrinated with that. This isn't like you're not dealing with a pragmatic enemy, which has always been the argument, right? In the Middle East, they're much more pragmatic than you think. Hamas at this point is not acting pragmatically. They're acting only ideologically. They want to see if they can harm Israel in the diplomatic realm, even if they can't in the narrative realm, even if they can't defeat Israel militarily.
Alex, perhaps one of the top stories here over the last couple of days has been the resumption of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu on Sunday night ordering at least limited aid to Gaza. At this point, there is no mechanism in place. The prime minister says we'll get there in terms of the aid not going to Hamas, but you do have trucks going into Gaza. You do have ministers such as Minister Ben Gvir completely opposed to the move. You had Minister Smotrich say he understood why it was necessary. The prime minister justifying the aid, saying that we have tremendous amount of international pressure on Israel, including from our best friends in Congress and in the Senate, saying that aid must be given to the Arabs. So at this point, again, it's a very sensitive topic here, especially for the families. There are those who oppose it. There are those who are saying we should do anything if it would lead to getting back the hostages. Very, very sticky subject matter there. What do you think the Prime Minister's logic is there after all this time resuming giving aid to Hamas? Well, I should say giving aid to Gaza, which is actually still ending up in the hands of Hamas right now.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think you necessarily made a mistake in your wording there. It's actually Israel that wants the humanitarian aid to go in, and this is somewhat surprising, right? It's You're hearing in the reports that the president is now talking about starving Gazans, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio putting pressure on Israel to bring the humanitarian aid in. And I could see why Netanyahu wants to lean in on so-called American pressure, but I don't think there is American pressure on Israel to restore the humanitarian aid. It's actually coming from Israel, and Israel understands that in international law, you have more difficulty if there's not humanitarian aid going into the place. Israel is the only one that's going to allow any humanitarian aid to go into Gaza, because any aid that comes from any other source by Egypt, or as we saw that there were trucks coming from Jordan, which the Biden administration really demanded that Israel would not inspect. And so you see Israel requires inspection because what's going to be on those humanitarian aid trucks? There could be submachine guns and whatever else on humanitarian aid trucks. So Israel wants to guarantee that it's providing the oversight and security on whatever's getting into the Gaza Strip. But they also understand that if they withhold any humanitarian aid during a military offensive, that the ICC, the ICJ, the UN General Assembly will all crack down on Israel. So the calculation has been made that if you're actually going to defeat Hamas, if you're going to go toward an end goal, hopefully, and we can discuss this a little bit after, of removing Gazans from the Strip, then feeding them is like the least of the requirements, I guess, is and because Israel's trying to accomplish a lot, so they feel that if they let food in, that insulates them a little bit from international criticism. If they withhold food, then that is going to only multiply criticism of Israel. So they're letting the food in. The United States is helping with that, and this is really the reason why you're seeing the aid only start now with the resumption of the military campaign.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here because Israel seems to be the only country in the world which is willing to send in aid to the so-called civilian population of its enemy. No pressure on any other countries to do such a thing. Do you really think this is the right move? You said it was the lesser of all the evils. But that being said, the aid is getting into the hands of Hamas. They're still holding 50 plus Israelis in the dungeons of Gaza. I have a hard time swallowing that pill, honestly.
Right. So it's a question of how does humanitarian aid get into a war zone? Right. So we saw humanitarian aid trucks going through Egypt. Israel cannot rely on Egypt for anything right now. So you could say, hey, we're fighting, somebody else bring in the aid. If that's what you want to do, bring it in. But Israel's not going to permit aid to go through Egypt. Okay. We saw, and we talked about it on this podcast many times about a year ago when the United States set up that port, the floating port in Gaza. It doesn't work. Okay. It was a disaster. People were killed because of the port and the waves. You just cannot do it. America tried airdropping aid in to the Gaza Strip. People were killed. The aid literally fell on, we saw pallets falling on people. Israel wants to make sure that any aid that does make its way into the Gaza Strip is fully inspected by Israel. Okay, so if that's the case, you could put the onus of the humanitarian aid on another country to do it, but Israel is demanding to be inspecting it, so they have to play a role. But you're also seeing that the United States has sent over private contractors, have basically sent in private contractors to help with the delivery and the distribution of the aid. The IDF says that they don't have a mechanism to deliver the aid because they're not in control of the Strip yet. So they're allowing a very basic amount of humanitarian aid to come into the Strip, much less than in previous rounds when the United States was demanding more aid, more aid, more aid. This is less aid, and the United States is helping to distribute it. And when Israel is in full control of the Gaza Strip, hopefully within several weeks' time, then you'll see mechanisms put into place for the more regular distribution of this aid. Also, the IDF is the only party that can guarantee or can try to guarantee that Hamas doesn't get their hands on it.
Alex, switching gears here, it's been several days, but we haven't discussed it on this show. I wanted to break down President Trump's trip to the Middle East. President Trump visiting 3 countries, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, solidifying major investment deals. You're talking about billions, if not trillions of dollars in deals. There was a big deal made about Trump not coming to Israel. He insisted this was in no way a snub. He made that clear in comments over the last week. What are some of the takeaways from his visit and, in general and vis-a-vis Israel?
Right. So I think for the president, it was important for him to demonstrate that America is coming back into the region and is coming back as a reliable ally into the region. The Biden administration really had sent mixed signals at best to the Saudis and others, and demonstrated themselves to be quite an unreliable ally, especially as they were choosing to direct money towards Iran. The president is putting crippling sanctions on Iran and is leading with economic partnerships to the Saudis and the Qataris to say it is worth your while to do business with the United States. And the reason why he's leading with the economics is because if there's not economic advantages to partnership with the United States, what you're going to see is the Saudis and the Qataris moving towards China, who are definitely leading with economic advantages as part of their proposal. So you have to come in with major economic benefits if you want to keep American influence over the Saudis, over the Qataris. And people say, well, maybe Trump's just doing that because, he's doing business in those places and he's going to get rich over this. And we saw the whole questions about the Qatari plane, which, I would predict, I'm not a prophet, but I would predict that the plane does not get delivered in the end of the day. We'll have to wait and see. I don't have any inside information on that. It's just a guess here, but I don't think that Trump is leading into the Middle East because he wants to get wealthy on it. I think it's the opposite. I think because he and members of his team have done business, extensive business in the Middle East, they think that they can bring these countries back towards the American side, so to speak. And with regard to Qatar, there's a big difference of opinion, obviously, between Israel and the U.S. administration on the role of Qatar. The president understands that Qatar has been housing Hamas officials, leadership in the country, has been sending money to Hamas, has been sending money to all kind of terrorist actors in the region, and certainly has been trying to impact the curriculums in American universities. Now, there was another party that was trying to impact curriculums on American universities even before the Qataris, and it was the Saudis. But the Saudis have really since moderated their position. And the president is hedging his bet that Qatar values the economic relationships that it has with the West more than the economic relationships that they have with the terrorists who are losing the war. So the president is hoping that Qatar will follow the path of Saudi Arabia and really stop with the malign activity and recognize that their path to prosperity comes from doing business with the United States. What's the flip side of that? I mean, the United States could put crippling sanctions on Qatar, right? So that's your choice. And Qatar does want to play this double game, and they do want to play the game of projecting themselves as moderates. So the president's saying, prove it, that we're going to give you that opportunity. And the same thing is actually going on with Syria right now. Syria fell, Bashar Assad was part of the Iranian Shiite axis, even though he himself was Alawi. Syria became part of the Iranian axis and acted as a land bridge to Lebanon and Hezbollah, and also was its own forward front against Israel. And what Israel did, and one of the most unsung achievements of the war was when Bashar Assad fell, was to take out the entirety of the Syrian military capability. All the airplanes, all the ships, whatever was there, Israel took it out. And now you have al-Shara, also known as al-Jawlani, who definitely has ties to al-Qaeda, who has been pushed into Syria and backed by the Turks. So these aren't good actors here. Nobody's saying that Jawlani is a good actor, but if that country remains broke, okay, because of crippling American sanctions, they're going to look for money elsewhere. And who's going to put that money in? So again, President Trump saying, let's give these guys a chance to show that they want to moderate their behavior on economic interests alone. And let's hope that they get into this new Saudi, the president wants the Saudis to be the major power brokers of the Arab world in the Middle East, better than Iran, better than others. So Trump's trying to pull Syria into Saudi's orbit and is removing sanctions from Syria, and is also at the same time even talking about normalization with Israel, which would mean Israel potentially keeping as part of a recognized agreement the northern Golan Heights that they took during the earlier stages of the war. And so Trump is he's really trying to stabilize much of the Middle East and isolate the major problem, which is Iran, and together with Hamas. These are Israel's number one and number two enemies. And Trump giving Israel freedom of operation to deal with Gaza. We have to see what's going to happen with Iran, but really trying to use an economic vision to stabilize the other players in the Middle East.
Yeah, President Trump heaped high praise on al-Shara there in his meeting. The head of Syria, while in Saudi Arabia. He said that the Syrian leader was a young, attractive guy, tough guy with a strong past, very strong past, a fighter. He's got a real shot at holding it together. Despite what you said right now, I mean, what do you think about groups like the Druze and the Kurds and other minorities in Syria who are seeing the president of the United States embrace this leader who has essentially carried out massacres, even though he now describes himself as a moderate? But, the proof is in the pudding there in terms of his actions. With everything you said, how do those jive, with what al-Shara is actually doing on the ground? If you're a Druze sitting up there in Syria, what are you saying to yourself if you're seeing the president embracing him, even if it's for the right reasons, as you described?
Well, nobody should consider, al-Shara as a moderate. He's not a moderate. In fact, I mean, what we saw, they came through and they've committed ethnic massacres already. I believe that as many as 3,000 Alawites of Bashar Assad's Alawi were murdered. Okay, that's more people than were killed on October 7th. Okay, so nobody should think that these guys are moderates, but they're also desperate for money. And don't believe for 1 second that Trump came in and said, "Oh, here's a blank check. You guys are great." He said in public that he's great, but you could be certain that behind closed doors that there were warnings that the killings have to stop, that the targeting of Alawite, the targeting of Christians, the targeting of Kurds, and the targeting of Druze need to stop, that the movement down south toward Israel has to stop, that they will not prevent Israel from doing whatever they want militarily in the country. And just this past, as sanctions were released from Syria, giving them a chance to try to stabilize the country, sanctions can go right back on. The president is not he's not doing this because he thinks that the bad guys are moderates. He understands the score. It's not like the Biden and Obama administrations looking at the Islamic Republic of Iran and saying, these are the moderates, okay? Or when Obama looked at the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and said, yeah, these are the people we need to partner with, pushing out Hosni Mubarak, who was at least stable, if not, it was a stable ally there in Egypt. So the president, he knows what's going on, but he's trying to give them a chance and leading with American dollars. If Jolani continues to carry out massacres and continues to show that he wants to get back into the Iranian axis or links up with Al Qaeda or the Muslim Brotherhood, the money's not going to continue to flow.
Let's talk about Iran. The United States set to hold further negotiations with the Iranians somewhere in Europe this week. You did have Special Envoy Steve Witkoff on Sunday say that the United States demands no enrichment of uranium, period. He said, quote, "We have one very, very clear red line, and that is enrichment. We cannot allow even 1% of an enrichment capability." This is Steve Witkoff speaking on ABC News over the weekend. So that's where things stand. President Trump still willing to negotiate with Iran, but laying down the law there, setting red lines, no enrichment of uranium.
Well, that's obviously a very positive development. In the past, there was some level of ambiguity about what the American negotiating position was going to be. I believe that there were past comments which said, we'll study the issue of enrichment, or perhaps there could be a little bit of enrichment. And now you hear Witkoff coming forward and stating loudly and clearly that there can be zero enrichment. And this is important. If you are going to get to a deal, it has to be a complete deal where there is zero enrichment, where the United States or others get to enter into all facilities. Remember, President Trump said a few weeks ago that the facilities need to be destroyed, detonated, and that they can either be, quote, bombed nicely or bombed viciously. So you're talking about some kind of a deal that would essentially end the entirety of the Iranian nuclear program, but hopefully not done in the context of a war in which there could be all kind of collateral damage to other countries in the Middle East, and you don't know how that's going to go. Will the Iranians do it? If they understand that the gig is up, if they understand that Israel and possibly the United States are going to be bombing these facilities in a matter of weeks, if some deal is not reached, if they understand that also political institutions and potentially Iranian leadership are going to be targeted, and that their days of ruling Iran might come to an end, perhaps there's a pragmatism on their side. At the same time, these are religious fanatics that believe in the coming of the 12th Mahdi, the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, and when the Mahdi comes, potentially 2/3 of the world can die by plague and 2/3 by sword. So we don't know if we're dealing with the religious fundamentalists or if there's a pragmatic side. But I think that the president's timeline on this is not very long. The president wants this situation to be resolved. Certainly within the next several months. He doesn't want to be getting into a period where there's a midterm election coming where the Middle East has become further destabilized. The president recognizes that if a military operation is in order, that the level of instability could increase dramatically, and he wants that to be in the rear view mirror by the time that he gets moving towards midterm elections. So I think that there's going to be several more weeks where Witkoff and others could potentially try to negotiate some last ditch deal. But if it doesn't work, I really think that we are on the runway towards the destruction of the nuclear facilities in Iran.
Alex, let's take a look here on another front. That is Judea and Samaria. One of the most difficult, I would say, terrorist attacks took place this past week. 30-year-old Sila Gez, may God avenge her blood, was murdered. You're talking about a pregnant woman in labor who was on the way to the hospital in the northern Samaria. Her husband was driving her to the hospital, ready to deliver their fourth child, and she was gunned down. We have the video. We can see an Arab terrorist coming out of the bushes and shooting at vehicles on a major thoroughfare. And unfortunately, she was murdered. The baby was delivered. He remains in serious but stable condition. I believe he was actually given a name here in the hospital over the last day or so. Just a terrible terrorist attack here in Judea and Samaria this past week.
It's awful. It's just awful, and that's what you see. This is the difference between a country that values life and terrorists. Terrorists intentionally target civilians, right? Who was the target? These terrorists go to an army base and start firing at soldiers, or were they firing at soldiers on patrol? No, this was a random car of a woman that happened to be heading to the hospital. A husband and a wife were going along the road, and this is who the terrorists opened fire on. People forget on October 7th, this wasn't an attack on military bases. They went when they did because they knew that there was a music festival and there were going to be kids there that could be killed or kidnapped. That's who they targeted. They went into people's homes on the holiday and ripped people out of their homes. They just start shooting at citizens because they don't want citizens to be there. Okay, so it's an intolerable form of cruelty. This is what we're dealing with, and Israel's been tolerating it for a long time. Everybody talks about tolerance. Okay, tolerance means putting up with something that is completely unacceptable in any other circumstance. That's what tolerance is. Israel has to stop being tolerant. Israel has to recognize that October 7th was not an isolated event or an accident. There are many October 7ths that take place every day. Maybe not with 6,000 people crossing the border, but here all it needs is one person with a machine gun, submachine gun to open fire on a pedestrian. On a civilian thoroughfare, and it's not going to stop until Israel defeats Hamas, and it's not going to stop until Israel goes in to Judea and Samaria and starts collecting guns, goes house to house like they did in Gaza, and eradicates whatever terror infrastructure exists in Judea and Samaria.
I definitely agree with you there. Alex, we're almost out of time. Just one other news item here. I thought it was very, very fascinating. Eli Cohen, our man in Damascus, the Israeli spy who was caught and eventually hanged there in Damascus. Some of his belongings were recovered now that Israel has access to, Lebanon and Syria. Several original documents, personal items that were in Syria were brought back to Israel, presented to Eli Cohen's widow, Nadia, and Prime Minister Netanyahu on hand in an operation there to retrieve. At the end of the day, it was actually thousands of documents in addition to photos and other items there from the legendary Israeli spy. I just thought it was fascinating that Israel was able to recover these documents and other items after so many years.
An indication of just how far Israel's willing to go to not only to return living hostages, not only to return the bodies of those killed that were held, like we saw last week, but even to get the documents and the belongings of Eli Cohen. This is all precious to Israel. And the story of Eli Cohen is an incredible story. There's a great book about it. There's also a pretty good Netflix series on it, The Spy, with Sacha Baron Cohen. It's more or less goes according to the actual story, and worth watching. It was a good series for sure. And it's a reminder. It's a reminder to Syria, to Lebanon, to Iran, of just how good Israeli intelligence can be, not just to locate things that Israel's not necessarily supposed to know where they're located, but even their ability to go get them. So, the long arm of Israel reaches well beyond its borders, and it's good to get sometimes a smile, a piece of good news amid what's otherwise been a very difficult time.
Yeah, pretty unbelievable story. That's all the time we have for today. Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS, good to see you on the screen, and looking forward to having you in studio next week. Please God, have a safe trip home.
Thanks so much, Shush. Be well.
I want to give a shout out to our production team behind the scenes here, Yuri Svretsky, Ryan Lifshitz, Zach Sickerman, Esther, Ed, and everyone else here in the JNS Media Hub. Make sure you go to YouTube and check out all the amazing content that JNS TV has to offer, and go to jns.org for all the latest breaking news from Israel, the Middle East, and the entire Jewish world. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS News. Looking forward to having Alex Traiman, CEO, back in studio next week. Have a great week, everybody.